Okay.
Good to go.
Okay. Thanks, Ali. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Audit Risk and Assurance Committee meeting. I was looking to see if we had a number of the meeting. You know, is this the 105th or whatever? But it doesn't tell me that on the agenda. So, welcome anyway. We are recording this morning, so if I could ask when you first speak, if you could say who you are, where you're from. To comply, Brian Baverstock, Chair of the Audit Committee. Thanks to everyone for joining, and Pamela Nicol for stepping in to take the note of this meeting. Thanks very much, Pamela. Couple of things in terms of welcome. It's to welcome Malcolm Payton. Malcolm has, there's Leslie now. Malcolm has taken over from Paul Stollard. We managed to secure Malcolm as a late transfer deal just before the window closed. So good to have you, Malcolm. And you've already had a taster in the private session with the auditors this morning, so you have a sense of what might come. Morning, Leslie. Thanks very much for joining us. We've just begun, so you've not missed anything. Apologies for absence. Ali, are you able to just confirm?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So apologies from Martin London, Chief Officer, Ross Haggart, Deputy Chief Officer, Robert Scott, Chief Inspector, HMFSI, and Graham Fraser, Assistant Inspector, here on his behalf. And also from our external auditors, Deloitte, both Pat Kenny and Carolyn Jameson, giving their apologies, and that's all, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Ali. Excuse me, it's disappointing that the external auditors were not able to join us. And welcome, Graham. Nice to see you, although I can't actually see you at the moment, but I'm sure we will see you in due course. So welcome to the meeting. Next issue on the agenda is items to be taken in private. At the moment, we have the minutes from the last meeting and the internal audit report on the alleged misappropriation of smoke detectors and trauma bag. Are people content that these should be taken in private session, and are there any other issues that anyone believes should be taken in that session? No. Okay, thank you for that. Declarations of interest in relation to the agenda. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Obviously, if anything should change throughout the discussion, then please highlight it as we go forward. Okay, that then takes us on to the minutes of our last meeting on the 30th of March. First of all, can we agree these as an accurate record of the meeting?
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of matters arising, is there anything in the minutes that's not covered elsewhere on the agenda that anyone wants to raise? No. Okay, thank you very much. That takes us on to the action log, and Ali, will you just run through this, please?
Right, thank you, Chair. Ali Cameron, Board Support Manager. So just turning to page 13 of your pack in relation to the Audit Assurance Committee Rolling Action Log, the committee will see that there's a total of 3 actions, all of which have been marked as blue completed. So just to confirm that the committee are content with the position statement updates and for these to be removed accordingly from the log. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Ali. Are we content? Yeah, looks like it, Ali. Ali, just one question, if I may, on the first 7.1.6. I had to remind myself and go back to the minutes of January, just to understand what the action actually related to. And I was clearer, but not absolutely clear, but it's around relationships or liaison rather between the inspector, the auditors and the management team, and that the response is that a schedule of 6 monthly meetings have been established. I wonder if anyone's able to give me a kind of sense or flavour of what these meetings will be discussing and what you would hope to achieve from these meetings. So I don't know whether anyone, I don't know, Gary, whether you can offer a view or management can offer a view, but
happy to offer a view, Chair. So that there are a number of reasons why we would do this. One of them is to maintain open communication channels so that we are regular being updated in dynamic risk and how that is changing and how that may change an internal audit response. That's the key area. We would talk about lots of issues around in meetings like that. So, for example, on your agenda today, we have upcoming internal audit reports and how we're shaping those and emerging issues that are coming out of those. The management response to recommendations that are being made and how those have been tracked and managed, and as a way of horizon scanning any obstacles and barriers or challenges within the management of those issues, and then that look forward to the next quarter internal audit work. What are we going to be doing? How is that being set up? How is it being focused? Is everything in place to support and address that? The key part of it are these open communication channels where management can just ask the auditor now in an environment where there are lots of senior leaders in the room that enables just that informal chat without a formal report, in a way that internal audit can add some value to the work of the fire service.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Specifically in terms of the relationship with HMFSI, is there anything either you or Graham can say? Because I mean, the principle here is that you're providing assurance to the organisation. The inspector is providing assurance to the organisation, obviously recognising the independence of that aspect of it. But in terms of that working together, I wonder if you could offer a comment.
Well, yeah, so I mean, from an internal audit perspective, that works really very well. So examples have been when we were going to look at areas in the past, and it was also in the HMSFI work plan. We have agreed between us how we would manage that workload to avoid duplicating effort, and also we have changed our audit programs to support concerns or issues being raised by HMFI, just to ensure that they were able to rely on that work. So I think that works from a really strong joint working perspective, and obviously the inspectorate has the ability, because they are reporting to ministers, to have that separate independent role. So they sometimes you can look at an area from a number of aspects. But we have really good working relationships, and from where I sit, that seems to work very well. Okay, that's great. Graham, yeah, please come in.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to echo what Gary said there. It's about ensuring that there's, a good coordination between us both. We do look at separate areas, if you like, but we don't want to be duplicating effort and causing SFRS officers, an extra burden.
Yeah, thanks for that, Graham. And it's good to hear that relationship is now well established and it appears to be working well. So thanks to you both for that. Okay, so Ali, I think that allows us to remove the 3 items from the action log.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that then takes us on to the annual report from the committee to the board and the accountable officer. And I see my name is against this. So just very briefly, it's a requirement that the committee provides a report to the board and the accountable officer, and that's what's here before you. I'm grateful to Ali for doing the heavy lifting on this. Just really want to highlight a couple of things. That it's the purpose of the report is, as stated in the first paragraph, to provide the committee's opinion on the effectiveness of governance, risk management, internal control across the organisation. And we are able to do that through the work that we receive and scrutinise throughout the year, and the opinion that we form on the reasonableness of all of that. In particular, we are able to draw upon the specific opinion that or opinions that are raised by the internal auditors, the external auditors. We do significant scrutiny of risk, and we also are able to look at and place some reliance on the work of HMFSI. The conclusion of all of that effort is set out in paragraph 10 of the report, and I guess in particular I'm looking for you, the committee, to confirm you are able to agree with that conclusion, which is that the product of all of that effort is that we can conclude that the service has effective governance, risk management and internal controls. I'm not going to say any more than that, but committee members, are you content with the content and the conclusion of the report? Tim?
Thank you, Chair. Tim Wright, member of the Audit and Risk Committee and board member. I'm right here in Pedant's Corner, and it's a minor point, but I think it's one worth making. It's in paragraph 3.1 where we say that we met 5 times in public. Now, I have a long-standing and I think well-recorded view that I think the way that we have met during COVID is not as public as I would want or expect it to be. But I accept that we have had to, make adjustments because of the situation that we've been in. But I'm just a little bit uncomfortable with it being stated quite so plainly that there were public meetings, because it appears to normalise what I hope will have been a very abnormal set of circumstances. So I think I would like to have the caveats around what made those or the nature of those public meetings ahead of it just being stated, well, that we have 5 public meetings, because in my estimation they were not as public as I would hope they could and should be. And I appreciate it's a pedant's point, but I'm just cautious about these things being normalized through formal reporting. No,
it's a point well made, Tim, and in fact, now that I think on it, the 5th meeting was a private session, so that most definitely wasn't in public. And I wonder if in response to your comment, whether we take out the words "in public" from that first sentence, because later on in the paragraph it talks about the public having access as an observer via the MS Teams functionality. So if we were to make that adjustment, would that give a more balanced presentation?
Yes, absolutely. I think so. I think that it would be difficult for us to say that the necessity of having MS Teams and online facilities constitutes a public meeting. So if we make that clear that it was done under those circumstances, then I think that's fine. Okay,
thanks. And Mark, you had your hand up, but that's addressed to your point, I think. Yeah, excellent. Okay. Any other comments, or are we content to agree this report? Okay, that it will
Chair, apologies. Just to confirm, just for that accuracy of the minute, Ali Cameron, Board Support Manager, all meetings were public. So the 5th one was public meeting. So just to confirm, just in relation to that point as well for accuracy.
Okay.
And just in regard to the meetings, I suppose it's just how they're defined in terms of being publicly available. So certainly we'll amend that appropriately to make that clearer as has been discussed.
No, that's helpful, Ali, and apologies. I thought that the meeting we had to discuss the Deloitte report was in private session, but it was in public session. And I think Tim's point is not that by a definition the meetings weren't in public, but it just creates an impression which probably is not the reality. So no, that's fine. Okay, well, thanks very much for that. So that then moves us on, as if it were well planned, to the annual governance statement, because our annual report feeds into this document. And Mark, I think you're going to just give us the sort of high-level introduction to this.
I am indeed, Brian. So Mark McAteer, Director of Strategic Planning, Performance and Communications. And as you say, this is the annual governance statement for the period 21-22. You'll recall back in March we had our discussion, as we do every year with the committee, on our approach to our internal assurance processes. And as you say, we draw upon the evidence of the committee statement as in addition to 3 other kind of key areas of assurance: the views of internal audit, the views of external audit, and then the process that each director goes through with their heads of function and management teams to build up an assurance statement that we all sign off for the chief officer around any issues of governance and assurance across the year within our directorate. So I'm pleased to say that all of that is now obviously concluded, and there are no significant issues that have been identified this year from the assurance process. There are, as there are each year, there are areas of improvement, particularly at directorate level, that are identified. They're captured in the assurance process, and any such improvements will be carried forward into next year. We've also taken some account clearly of the changes around about the audit, the fraud and risk reporting. Again, they'll be carried forward into next year as well. But with those points aside, there is nothing significant that's come through this year that I would draw the committee's attention to. And with subject to your approval, we'll proceed with this, and it'll go into the annual reports and accounts that will come back to the board in October of this year. So with that, Brian, happy to take any questions from board committee members.
Thanks, Mark. Very helpful summary. Mary.
Thanks, Brian. Mary Wiley, board member. Just a couple of things, and this is where I become a bit more of a pedant. On page 29, if I've got my correct thing, sorry, I'm having to jump between screens at the moment, but it mentions the transition of the new board members on, but it misses out that aspect for Stuart Balling. So I just think it would be worth making sure that he's got the same brackets that joined in July 2021. I know it's a small point. And then page 36, it mentions Integrated Governance Forum. Now, I'll hold my hand up and say that I don't keep an accurate record, but I'm not entirely convinced that that reflects my attendance correctly at the Integrated Governance Forum. But also, I don't know if it necessarily reflects the changes that happened in that year. I'd find it bizarre if, for example, Primrose didn't attend an integrated governance within that period. So the other records actually reflect the changes that happened, and that one doesn't. And I think I only attended 3, not 4, and I was only able to attend 3, not 4, because I didn't take that role up until later. I know they're small points, but just for points of accuracy. But otherwise,
thanks, Mary.
We'll make the correction on
for pedants.
Yeah, apologies. We'll make the correction on Stuart Ballingal. That's just an oversight. And again, we will double check the numbers for the record for IGF, and we'll come back if there's any changes required in that. Okay. I'm assuming Ali's already double checked, but we will go back over and I'll inform Brian clearly if we need to make an amendment. So I think they're correct. Ali's just messaging me on the side, but we will double check those figures and make sure that they are accurate.
Okay, thanks, Mark, and thanks, Mary. Tim.
At the risk of seeming like an uber pedant, I am going to be a bit like Mari and say I don't want the record to look like my school attendance record, and I'm pretty certain that I attended 3 ARAC meetings rather than 2. So I'm happy to discuss this with the offline, but I'm pretty sure it was 3 rather than 2. But I would prefer it to reflect more than 50% attendance.
It may be, Tim, that your attendance has been attributed to Mary, albeit a different setting, but I'm not sure how these things work. But perhaps if we could just do a quick recheck of all of these things, it would be helpful. Okay. Other points? No. Once again, I mean, I just want to commend the comprehensiveness of the document. I mean, it is very thorough, and of course, the more thorough you make it, the more opportunity there is for issues to be raised. But the fact that there are no issues beyond the couple of relatively simple matters, I think, is testimony to the quality of the report. So thanks again, and thanks for those who did the heavy lifting on that, and I think in large part that fell to you, Ali, so well done for that. So on that basis, we're content for this. This is the personal statement for the accountable officer, but we have a hand in reviewing it as a draft and providing comment. John, you're not going to upset things now, are you?
Sorry, I just feel obliged, only because I've had a discussion with Matt around this, and it's just to bring to the attention of the committee. Obviously, there's been a change to the accountable officer at the moment, obviously to Ross. Now that happened at the tail end of the reporting period. And certainly is something that, you know, from a governance perspective, we have to have an accountable officer. It was just to recognise that change. I would see this almost like a post-balance sheet event, and not something that has to be reported specifically against the 2021 period. But it was just to give that thought process to the committee and to see if there was anything else that you would want to say around that. I just thought it would be appropriate to raise it at this point.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, John. And there's different schools of thought on what should go into the annual governance statement, whether you treat it in the same way that you treat the annual accounts, so anything up to the date of signing should be reflected. And to be honest, now that you've raised the point, I mean, given the materiality of the issue, I feel it perhaps is appropriate for it to be reflected in some way, but I'm not going to make a kind of judgment on that, but maybe just to reflect, you know, how we do that. Mark, please come in, and then Leslie.
Yeah, I suppose I think we can make some adjustments for the, as you say, the materiality. But let's put the materiality into context for the organisation. That the chief officer has got a very important role in terms of governance, but the key issues in terms of strategy, finance, audit and scrutiny, you know, those rest with the board, supported by the chief officer and SLT. So our governance is built around the board, not the chief officer. We're different in that sense from a private company where most of that will be built around the chief executive stroke chief officer. So I think the governance assurance of the organisation, I would say, remains strong because our processes are in place, the board is still in place, the committees are still in place. They have functioned well throughout the period. And that's not to say clearly the chief officer's absence hasn't had an impact. It has, but I think let's put it into that context is all I would suggest. And clearly, if it extends further, then it's maybe something for next year we need to think more fundamentally about. But for me, the governance and accountability framework is built from the board downwards, not from the chief officer downwards, if that makes sense, Brian.
No, that makes perfect sense, Mark, and I agree with all of that. I mean, the strength of the governance does not vest in, well, in fact, one person. It invests in the collective.
Any individual, yes.
So that's fair comment. I mean, my eyes are kind of drawn to the introductory paragraphs in the governance statement where it talks about I have responsibility, and it feels almost slightly disingenuous not to reference the change. But I think please take that away and reflect. Leslie, you're perhaps going to give us the insight that we need into all of this.
I think I see the accountable officer role as a designated role, irrespective of who happens to fill it. At every point, we have an accountable officer, and whoever is occupying the accountable officer role speaks as I. And I actually think it's fine as it is, to be honest, in the absence of alternative guidance from John or from our auditors. I think the the report is written in the office of the accountable officer, and I think it works that way. Thanks.
That's very helpful, Leslie. Thank you. Gary.
Just really to concur with Leslie's comment, so accountable officers come and go across a range of bodies, and all that matters is you have an accountable officer who is able to make the statement. Retrospective statements, if the accountable officer wasn't imposed in the relating to the year under review or audit, it doesn't matter. The accountable officer is still the accountable officer, so the use of I is perfectly appropriate.
That's again also very helpful, Gary, and I think John gives a kind of committee view on this, so thanks for raising that. Okay, so I think that then allows us to move on to talk about debt write-off, and John or Lynn, who's going to talk to this?
It'll be myself, and I also forgot to introduce myself. So John Thompson, Acting Director of Finance and Procurement, so apologies for that. So in terms of this report, basically I want to present to ARIC for recommendation to the board, proposed write-offs of debt for the financial year 21-22. The committee will recognise on an annual basis we have to review our debtors to determine any amounts that are required to be written off, and this review has been completed. Any amounts in excess of £1,000 requires board approval, and this report highlights that 3 debts have reached that threshold and therefore require write-off, having followed all the kind of possible routes to recover those monies. The service, as you will probably be aware, a debt is a debt because it's public money, and the service will continue to try and seek to recover a debt until it becomes time expired. So in these cases, that there is 3 that relate to individuals who we cannot trace, and the debt has now become time expired. The overall position is an amount of debt to be written off of just over £3,719.21 to be precise, and that is detailed at Appendix A. ARAC are effectively asked to scrutinise the report before we seek board approval on the 30th of June for the debt write-off.
Okay, John, thanks for that and your precision. Comments, questions? No. Just a couple of things from me then. I note that the second of the 3 examples relates to the late notification of a resignation, and I seem to recall seeing that as an underlying cause previously, and just wanted to ask about assurance that there's no kind of systemic problem around the notification of leavers.
I think this is an area of challenge in some circumstances, and I don't know in this particular instance if it was related to retained, but as an example, on the retained side, we definitely do not get the notification as timely as we would want on occasions, because individuals effectively, can basically decide, oh well, I'm not returning, and they don't give that notice. So there is a challenge when that then comes back to us from an overall payroll perspective in terms of recovery of that money. But that's the area that seems to be the most problematic across the service. We've tried, and we are continuing to try to ensure that the individuals give us the appropriate notice. Contractually, they're required to give us that notice, but that doesn't necessarily transpire into practice. Therefore, that gives us that risk where individuals effectively have left and we haven't been able to recover those monies, and therefore we get into a debt recovery process. I suppose you have to see this in the whole, in terms of the number of individuals that we're talking about and the overall processes that we use. I think we have been very effective, and I know that we have actually recovered and improved our debt recovery, in particular working with the legal teams to make sure that we do get people traced where possible, and we do recover those sums. So I don't think it's a significant issue, but I do understand that there is still remains issues in terms of individuals giving us sufficient notice of resignation, and that's just a particular factor that we work with HR and others to try and resolve.
Interesting, John, because I mean the way that I read the late notification is that the management processes were late in informing payroll that the person had resigned, as opposed to what you're describing. And is that the case, that the management passing on the information was late?
I'm not sure of the specific example, Brian. I'll be honest. I'm explaining to you some of the typical reasons as to why there is lateness in terms of the overall position. I don't know, Lynn, if you've got anything further to add to it. Shaking head, no. So no, that would be the position, Brian. Okay,
that's fine. Well, it's not material, so that's fine. I mean, I know this is about debt write-off, but the paper refers to 168,000 of outstanding debt. Now, that might have just been outstanding for a day or a week or perhaps longer. And it's the perhaps longer bit that I'm just curious about. Is there a big kind of issue here that, you know, when we get this report next year, you know, you'll be saying we've had to write off 130,000.
Okay, I'm looking to Lynn on this one, only because I know that we keep this as a key performance indicator within finance, and we measure it on a monthly basis, and we look to understand what's happening in terms of that day and how are we recovering in terms of our debtor days. So I would suggest that Lynn may be able to expand and add on to that, if that's okay, Chair.
No pressure, Lynn.
No, I wouldn't expect, but sorry, Lynn McGeoch, the acting head of finance and procurement, I always forget that, but I wouldn't expect that we would be in that position next year, Brian, on the basis of we do have quite stringent controls now, with working with legal to try and reduce the amount that we've got in debt outstanding. I don't know the particulars of that 168,000, but I know there will be areas in there that there may be one debt that could come to 130,000, and we could clear that off within a month or what have you. But as I say, we've got far better processes now than we did have previously, with the assistance of legal to kind of move these things forward. What I can do is kind of look into it in more depth for you, Brian, if you like, if you wanted to kind of see what that was made up of. But I would be quite confident to say that with the processes that we've got, we shouldn't be in that position next year that we're coming and asking to write off that amount of money.
No, I'm sure that won't be the case. If you're able to, at a press of a button, just give me that profile. That would be fine, Lynn, but don't go to any effort if it requires more than that.
No problem.
Malcolm.
Thanks, Malcolm Payton, board member and recently joined member of ARAC. No, I'm just looking at the, you're unable to locate the individual, and I understand the difficulties and the frustrations with that. I find it hard to believe in one sense, but that's more a comment on society or whatever than specifically. But I just wonder, do you link back with line managers? I mean, what I'm thinking, for example, is saying, look, if you're asked for a reference, you need to let us know because we're trying to trace this individual. Thanks.
I'll let you take that, John.
Yes is the answer, Malcolm. We do seek as much opportunity from individuals to say, what's happened. Can you tell us if there's any opportunity, or if they've moved, or what is it? What's the position here, and can they give us some insight? So we do look to try and understand that, Malcolm. So hopefully to give you that assurance.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
I suppose really, the point is, in a sense, to give people, like managers in particular, an ongoing obligation to get back to you if they hear any contact. Thanks, I think you've answered that.
Okay, Lynn, did you want to come back in?
Just to add a bit of assurance there, we do have processes in place where we are asking continually our employees to update their records so that we do have up-to-date address details, etc. from the employees across the service. And that happens on a regular occasion. We do a bit of a prompt just to make sure that these are as recent and as up-to-date as possible, which then should, you know, by a knock-on effect tie into areas that of concern like this, if somebody has moved on, you know, post leaving the organisation. So it was just to add a bit of comfort to that, if that helps.
Okay, Lynn, thanks very much. Slightly more discussion on this than I had anticipated, but thank you for all of that. It's been very worthwhile. I think on the basis of that discussion, we are content to recommend this goes to the board and is approved by the board at the next meeting. So thanks very much. That now takes us on to the chunk on the agenda, which is internal audit. And the first item we have is the internal audit annual report for 21-22. And is that you, Gary? Or
it's going to be me, Chair. And apologies, I didn't introduce myself either earlier. So Gary Devlin, Head of Internal Audit and a partner with Azet's Group. So I'll talk to the internal audit opinion and assume that members have read it, so I'll just be drawing out the key messages from the document. So on page 3 we set out the basis of opinion. So we undertake a range of work throughout the year with the fire service. Based on all of the work that we undertake, and I am concluding that we have undertaken sufficient work to support an opinion, we reach the opinion that SFRS has a framework of governance, risk management and controls that provides reasonable assurance regarding the effective and efficient achievement of objectives. That's the key opinion. That's a good opinion from internal audit. We're not able to cover every single system and process. We test on a sample basis. So the best that we're able to do is to give reasonable assurance, and just to confirm that that is a good outcome in relation to the internal control framework. Page 5 of our report sets out the cover that we achieved and provides a summary and a range of pie charts of the control objective assessments, and you can see that they are mainly yellows and greens, with the exception of portfolio office, which is a report on the agenda later for this meeting. Pages 6 and 7 cover progress in implementing prior actions, prior internal audit recommendations, and you can see that we conclude there that there is scope for improvement in how the organisation manages and tracks and implements prior year recommendations where management have agreed them. I should say that we are in really regular contact with the fire service in this, who are looking themselves at how they gain a better grip in this area to better manage that process. And there are a number of complexities to it, but just to confirm that we are working with management. We also summarise the follow-up outcomes from the specialist IT audit that I know was a source of concern for the committee. And then we highlight key themes from internal audit work around the portfolio office, around fire safety enforcement review, and we note that most of the other recommendations were grades 1 and 2, relatively minor findings. We undertook an additional review in relation to a fraud investigation, and that's on the agenda for later in the private session. And then the appendices confirm really the work that we undertook during the year. I would draw your attention to Appendix 1, simply to note that we had planned to undertake 150 days. We delivered 146 3/4 days, very precise. And really that's about some additional work and the impact of moving the workforce, the planned workforce planning for our DS firefighters review into the next year. So we are going to undertake that review in the coming year as opposed to the year under audit. We confirm that we comply with public sector internal audit standards. We've met our KPIs for the year, and I'm happy to take any questions on any aspect of the annual report. Thank you, Chair.
that's great, Gary. Thank you very much. And it would seem that the pedants amongst us are driving a degree of precision that knows no bounds. So excellent, well done. Comments, questions, Leslie?
Leslie Bloomer, board member. Thanks for the report. I think this is the end of our first full year working with you, or you're going to tell me it's our second?
It's our second year, Leslie, yes. So this is our second. Yes.
I think it's been good working with you. I think it's working well. I just like your reporting style, and I think that you serve us well. So thank you for that. I just wanted to comment on the point about recommendations. I think I am now what might be called an old hand at this committee, and when I first joined, a particular focus and a particular concern of this committee was the gold plating of recommendations. So a recommendation that started like this and then became bigger and bigger and bigger and just therefore never gets signed off. So I have a real concern about that kind of creeping in again. I know it's for the best of intentions, but I think that pulling it right back to what is the issue, what's the recommendation, let's sort it and do it quickly is really important. So I know that executive colleagues will be seeking to focus on that, and I just wanted to emphasise that is something that, as a committee member, I would very much welcome progress on. But thank you very much. Good report, and from my point of view, it's been very good working with you over the last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Just maybe some assurance in that follow-up issue, and I don't know if John might want to say something, but we recognise part of what we've been doing with management is to recognise some of those issues that happen in the follow-up, to try to challenge management to, are all these recommendations still valid, and then sharper, faster, or more timely clearance of those recommendations, and maybe a different route for how you manage them. But management are well aware of those issues, I would have to say, and we're having really good conversations.
Good. Thanks, Leslie. Thanks, Gary. John, do you want to come in on that last point, or is it another point?
Yeah, no, just specifically on that point, as Gary has articulated, we are very much looking at those actions and trying to strip it back to say, well, how is that against the control issue? And are we making sure that we're not just, we do have a tendency, and I'll describe it as shooting ourselves in the foot, because we seek to improve on the improvement, and therefore it takes longer. So with the best intent, we are therefore taking longer to resolve things because people believe that it's the right thing to do. Well, wait a minute, let's not just focus on the interim, let's wait until we've got the full solution, when actually the focus should be around, well, what is it we need to do in the interim to make sure that control is in place? And that's the bit that we need to seek the focus on. So it's with the best intent in terms of individuals, but something that we constantly need to work and with the support of ASETs have been working to try and resolve going forward.
Thanks, John. Tim.
Yeah, just in many ways echoing what's previously been said, but and I'm glad to hear that there's focus on us trying to address these things, and we as a committee have a role in obviously helping make that happen. But I wonder if Gary, do you have a sense of where we sit on a continuum? These are problems that are not unique to the fire service, but do you have a sense of where we sit by comparison to other sort of benchmarkable organizations? Are we better or worse, or are we reasonable, given your conclusions in the report?
Tim, I'm going to stick to my conclusions in the report, which do actually cover experience that we have elsewhere, and I think the conclusion that there is room for improvement in how the fire service monitors and reports and ensures implementation of previously agreed internal audit and other maybe HMF, SFI and other assurance provider recommendations, external audit and so on, could improve, and there is room for improvement. As I say, management are well cited on that, but I think in the next year the committee does have a role to play in ensuring that hope for improvement, you start to see some progress in how those improvement actions are reported back to you.
Okay, Gary, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Tim. It's a good point, and when we come on to talk about the implementation of recommendations paper, I'm sure we will kind of touch on this again, but it is an important point. If there are no other questions, just two two comments from me, Gary, and I think I may have made these last year. Appendix 2, it talks about the internal quality assurance assessment, and I'd be interested to understand whether any of the QA work actually reviewed work that was undertaken by you for the service. And the second point that I wanted to make is on Appendix 3, the KPIs and the customer feedback. But I still find it a little bit kind of unhelpful. The performance standard in this case is the risk and audit manager to hold post-audit discussions with key contacts, and the status is green. It's hard for me to judge why it's green, and I wonder if in future reporting we can introduce some feedback on what the feedback is.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll take those in order then. So the quality assessment, we have a variety of quality assessment reviews, but annually, as a minimum, all people acting as chief audit executives, so they are principals acting, and we've got over 200 internal audit clients, must have a proportion of their portfolio reviewed. So I fall into that category, and SFRS has been chosen and it has been tested, and we have we did get really strong quality review outcomes in relation to the way that we organise the SFRS internal audit. So I'm happy to provide that. One of the things we've done, we also have the second phase of that is we're required to have an external quality assessment. We have internal quality reviews. We're required to have external quality assessment reviews. That's coming up in the next year. So our next external quality assessment is coming up. And we have always shared that really openly and transparently. So we'll share the report with you at that time, so you can actually see everything that the external quality assessor says in relation to the service that we provide you, and we can have a conversation as a way of me providing assurance that I'm not just saying we comply with PSIAS. I'm able to demonstrate both internal and external in relation to the quality assessment. So that will come next year. In relation to the KPI, I do take your point, and there is a balance here. We work in a number of ways with different organisations in receiving feedback. So in some organisations, we send out questionnaires to the key contacts for each audit, and we ask for feedback, and we get a whole range of different types of feedback. For this one, what we had agreed to do is a way that does mean an element of bureaucracy, and sometimes there is a delay between people are a bit overwhelmed by questionnaires sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't sit right. The way that we've agreed to do it with the fire service, I'm really open to doing it any way which you feel is going to add the most value, is that we talk to the audit sponsor, but we also bring that feedback back to the regular meetings that we have with the management team. So if our audits have not gone well on SFRS, you can be really quite sure that we're strongly challenged on why that's happened. And admittedly, our Act doesn't really see that in the same way. So perhaps we could do a little bit more, and maybe that's something I could speak to John and others about, if there's a better way that's going to provide you with the assurance that you need that our audits have gone well. But certainly management are not backwards in telling us if we're not meeting their expectations.
Yeah, no, and I accept there are different ways to kind of cut this, and I'm not suggesting the way that it's being done here is not appropriate. But what would be helpful is to get, if you like, some evidence to support that assurance that
maybe
KPI is being met.
Maybe what we'll do, Gillian Callahan's on this call with us. So in the next progress report, we will provide a summary of the meetings that we've held and the feedback that we have received from those meetings. And it will, one, give you assurance that we are holding the meetings. So that's one part of assurance. And you'll also be able to see what people say to us, because you know, we do capture that within the feedback process.
Yeah, no, that would be helpful, Gary. Thank you for that. So thanks for all those comments, and I just want to take you back to the internal audit opinion, which is, as Gary has said, is a good one, although the word reasonable is used, and for those not steeped in the world of internal audit, it might feel as if we're being damned by faint praise, and in truth we are, but that's just the way that it is. So well done to the organisation for getting an audit opinion that reads in that way. So thanks, Gary, to the team for that, and to the organisation for getting us to that stage. That then takes us on to the internal audit progress report for the current year 22-23, which is understandably fairly light given where we are. And is that you again?
It's Gillian is going to take this.
Okay.
Hi, yeah, my name's Jill Callaghan. I'm a senior manager from ASITS, the internal auditors. If I can just draw your attention to page 2 of the progress report. As you can see, for all of the audits, we've agreed dates now with management as to when they'll take place. And as you know, the Q1 follow-up's actually already been completed. The revenue maximisation audit has already commenced, as well as since we wrote the report, the post-pandemic review has also commenced as well. We've held opening meetings for that review. So the work is underway for 22-23. One of the things we have done for this progress report, we're conscious of the comments that have previously been made by members regarding the scopes of the audit, and providing you with detail of what we're going to actually cover on each audit. So one of the things I've done is I've included the revenue maximisation and the post-pandemic review. So hopefully you'll get this in advance of the quarter, and just confirm the audit sponsors, the date we've agreed, an outlined scope, and we've also included the control objectives, which is how we structure our audit programs based on control objectives and the risks. So I was just really after sort of members' sort of opinions really on, is this a sort of information, is this enough, or do you think you require more information? So we're just basically after some feedback on the report. But that's it really. So the work is underway for the year. So don't know if you have any comments.
Thanks, Jill, and thanks for highlighting that change to the report, which, as you allude to, we have asked for previously. So thanks for taking that on board. Leslie.
Thanks for that, and again I echo Brian's thanks for the fact that you have given us the opportunity to contribute to the scope. I think it's important that we are able to input at that stage, so thank you for that, and I think this approach, this way of doing it is good. I've got 2 points, one in each of the scopes in the report. And I suppose my difficulty is in phrasing them in relation to control objectives. However, you're the auditors and you can consider that. So the revenue maximisation one, my question is whether you will be able to look at the services income derived from shared premises, and whether we are achieving an appropriate level of income, accepting that we all are part of the public sector family. So I'm struggling to see where that fits in the control objectives, but I think it's an increasingly important element of our income, and will become even more important given the pressure to share facilities, the rightful move to continue to share facilities, but also in the context of less money for all public services. So my second point is on the post-pandemic review, and my question here, and I've struggled to kind of phrase this in a control objective way, but it's whether we have we thrown out any babies with the bathwater? So are there any changes that we made during COVID that we've just defaulted back to the way we did things before, where actually we should have considered and hung on to more things? I suspect the answer is no, but I think that's it's an important question. Has there been a kind of has there been a defaulting back to previous methods without a kind of due consideration of the benefits planned and unexpected that came from different ways of working? I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. If I can just respond to those comments, Leslie, with regard to the revenue maximisation, I think it's the first control objective talks about how you identify all opportunities and to generate income. So obviously, as part of that, we would hope that would be identified, the shared premises. And obviously, now that you've mentioned that, we'll definitely make sure that we look at it. But we would hope that management would inform us of that, as you know, under that control objective with regard to the identification of income. With regard to the post-pandemic review, I mean, one of the things we've talked about there is the fact that any action plans that are developed are subject to regular monitoring and reporting on progress. So I think I would hope that if you had reverted back, that would be picked up as part of that. But I mean, obviously now you've mentioned it, I can make sure that we ask those questions when we conduct our interviews.
That's great. And just briefly, Brian, if I can come back on the shared premises, I know that John has got this firmly in his sights, but it's one of the reasons why I think it'd be quite useful to get the independence of independence of internal audit, just to say, okay, what do you think? And it could provide us with potentially some means of leverage going forward. That's my thinking, because I know, John, that you've got it firmly in your sights, but it'd be good to get AZET's view on it, AZET's view on it as well. But thanks, Jill, that's great.
Thanks, Leslie, and thanks, Jill. Gary.
Just very quickly on Leslie's point on the post-pandemic review, which is a really crucial point about maximising the learning from that. So the way we thought about this was in bullet point 1. So do management have arrangements in place for assessing the impact on the... So it is a little bit broader in thinking about how we do that. So if management have good arrangements for understanding what worked well, less well, areas of learning that they can carry forward into a post-pandemic world, then that would be a really positive outcome from internal audit. If they've not done that in a holistic, in-depth way, then we would bring that back to you and say, our finding is that arrangements haven't been as robust as possibly they could have been. So that I think that was the way that we were thinking about that. But except it's how you phrase it, Leslie, isn't it? It's sometimes hard to interpret, exactly what we might mean. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. And John.
I just wanted to pick up on the point of Leslie. I think it's well made, Leslie. And I think what we're trying to describe is almost the adequacy of the recovery model that we have in place with the shared service partners, and specifically, does that include the capital investment element as well as the resource element? So it was about that recovery and the adequacy of the recovery on a longer term basis that we might want to seek a bit more assurance. And I agree exactly with what you're saying, Leslie. It's to see if we can then seek that added value through the audit to then say, well, this has been raised, so that we can then take it forward and say we can point to this as well. So I get the point, and thank you for raising it.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Any other comments? No. A couple of things from me, Joe. Firstly, to say that I'd really welcome this development, including the terms of reference here. I think the level of detail that you provided is right, because it's enough to provoke a conversation, as we've just had. So thanks very much for that. Like Leslie, I've got a couple of comments on each of the two. On the first, the revenue maximisation, I feel that this is written maybe slightly too narrow, and wonder, because we have talked about this previously, whether it needs to get its arms around broader issues like commercialisation, sponsorship, innovation, because it's not just looking at what the service is doing, but it's hopefully going to pick up what it might do and what the opportunities might be. I think also needs to pick up, because we've had previous questions about how does the organisation kind of, you know, enhance its resources, you know, whether that's through borrowing, whether it's through a mechanism that allows it to accumulate a surplus. So it would be good, I think, for this to look at the issues around those things. So borrowing, the creation of subsidiaries, the creation of arm's length foundations, you know, mechanisms that might, you know, and I suspect I know the answer to these things, but given that we've got an audit on revenue maximisation, I think it's almost incumbent that we try and capture these things. And then I had the very similar point on the post-pandemic one. I mean, I have a particularly strong view that there is a real risk across all organisations that we settle back into what we did before. And I think every organisation should have a risk on its risk register around this. And I just felt that the wording was a little bit weak in the third bullet point of the control objectives, to take cognizance of the potential efficiencies. I don't think it's about taking cognizance. It's about hard edge. You know, have we articulated what the benefits have been, and how are we working to ensure that we don't lose those benefits? So it needs to be, I think, a bit stronger, and perhaps it will be stronger. It's just the words on the page. And just as a bit of an aside, but just to kind of emphasise how important this issue is, there is a meeting of Audit Committee chairs tomorrow, and a key agenda item is discussing this very issue. You know, how do organisations address the risk that we kind of revert back to the pre-COVID times and we lose the traction and the benefits of rapid change? So those were my observations on the two reviews. And Gary, you had your hand up, so please come in.
Yeah, just so those are really helpful, Brian, and I think that's the right type of challenge and how we think about how we structure these audits. So when we bring the assurance back to you, it's the type of assurance that's going to be meaningful and helpful and impactful for you. The first bullet on the revenue maximisation, we've kept that wide for the reason that we don't want to limit what we look at. So that's about clear arrangements to identify, assess and decide upon potential revenue generating initiatives. So the word potential there doesn't limit, it's not limited to what you have, it's what could you have. And what we're really aiming for a little bit is, do management have the business case, option appraisal, capacity and capability to understand the risks and challenges between all the different revenue generating models and options that will be available to them, and then how do they find their way through that in a business case option appraisal skill set to provide assurance to the board or whoever the right option to go with is this one for this reason, having thought about all of these different issues, or actually we're not able to do this, and so on and so on. So that's what we were thinking there. We wanted to keep it wide at this point rather than use language that narrowed that down. On the pandemic point, I think you're probably right. We've probably used that take cognizance probably doesn't quite convey what we're trying to achieve. And Jill, we can look at that, I think, just to be a bit sharper on. I think we meant the same thing that you meant, but the wording probably doesn't convey that. Yeah. So we'll take that away and maybe work with management about you know, a slightly sharper form of words.
No, that excuse me, that's really helpful. Thank you for that. And I think we've probably never had such a discussion on a progress report in June of any year. So I mean, that really does I think illustrate the benefit, and hopefully to John and others, it enables an opportunity for a perspective to be brought to this at the formative stages, which I hope you would agree is helpful. If you don't agree, you can tell me privately, but yeah, that's good. Thanks for that. Okay, that then takes us on to the first of two internal audit reports, this one on the portfolio office. And Paul, I think you're taking us through this one.
That's right, Chair. Thank you for that. So I'm Paul Kelly. I'm the Technology Risk Director for ASETS, the internal auditors. So Chair, just really looking to give some background to this report, first of all. So the awareness that there's a change portfolio and the portfolio office has been established, and with that, with the purpose of a portfolio office really being there to establish consistent and effective approaches to the delivery of change initiatives across the service. And at the time when we were planning this review, and it's still the case now, that there was a new structure being introduced for the portfolio office and new processes were being designed and implemented at the time. And because of that, our approach was more advisory in nature, recognising that it was a work in progress on that. So, and really, we've set out on page 2 of a report the conclusions from a review. We've set out 5 amber control objectives, ratings, 2 yellow rated and 1 green. But maybe rather than talk to the key findings, I think it's probably better to talk to the conclusion in this case. So really just emphasise again in the review, looked at what existing processes were for in-flight projects, what the planned activities were within the roadmap to establish the portfolio office, and what's been done in terms of completed and planned actions to address the gaps in the portfolio function. And from that, we identified that around about the portfolio office, there was a need for more guidance and processes about its own operation. Around about designing policies and procedures to set out how it will work and operate, and also on a wider sphere, how areas like the demand management aspect of the change portfolio, how that will be managed overall, looking at the identification of the demand, how it's prioritised, and then it's managed on an ongoing basis because there is constant change running through that. And also looking at areas, the need for the controls and governance arrangements about the portfolio office itself, and that's still to be documented. We also identified that there's a need for more documented mechanisms around about a range of project management processes. We identified their examples around about financial reporting, financial monitoring, a review of areas such as how you deal with issues, risks, dependencies and benefits that arise during a project and programme itself. And the final paragraph we've highlighted there, that this is the implementation of a portfolio office isn't something that you can flick a switch. It's something that takes time to design, build and embed in the organisation. And during our work, we identified it was looking like the roadmap was suggesting that it would be fully in place roughly by the end of this calendar year. And I think we were looking at that and thinking, is there an opportunity to accelerate that timeline, just to make sure we get as many change activities within a consistent and well-designed approach overall. And in doing that, we need to consider like what are the resourcing requirements of doing that, more in terms of the quantum of people, the skills you need, and the when you need them by. I'm also conscious as well of the employment market at the moment, so it's a challenging recruitment market, so you might want to bring forward your recruitment planning to get the people in when you need them. So that was all I planned to say, but more than happy to take any questions you have.
Thanks, Paul. I think that's a helpful summary of what is a really important report, and I acknowledge that it's been done as in the capacity as an advisory function rather than seeking assurance. So before I open it up to questions, I want to bring in Andy to say something, but before that, Andy, and welcome to the meeting. I just wanted to highlight something, and maybe you're able to pick this up, Andy, is that in reading the report, that there are various bits of the findings, conclusions, where the management response seems to move things on a little, almost that the information that was provided at the time of the audit had kind of moved on, and the audit was not reporting the most up-to-date position. So it would be helpful, maybe Andy, just to get get your take on that. The other kind of high level observation is that the report makes a number of organisational level observations and indeed kind of recommendations, and I'm interested in how the organisation, as opposed to your management response, Andy, is going to reflect on these and respond to them, because I think there are parts of those observations and recommendations that the response that you have provided doesn't fully address, and I can understand why they wouldn't do that. But so with that in mind, Andy, it would be helpful just to get your kind of your feedback on the report.
Thank you, Chair. Andy Main, Head of Portfolio, and good morning to committee members. Yeah, so I think the first thing that I would come in there on some of the feedback that Paul had provided in terms of the conclusion was more around the timing of the audit versus the formalisation of the function itself. So for committee members who don't know, I joined the organisation just a little over 12 months ago, and from joining SFRS, one of the first things that I sought to undertake was a bit of an assessment in terms of the capabilities that we had in place within the organisation for portfolio and indeed project management. And one of the conversations that Paul and I had before the audit actually commenced was to share that initial assessment that we had provided as a function. So we were all aligned in terms of what I thought the findings and the observations from the audit itself would be. And so there was no hidden surprises with regards to that as well. And I think that was one of the elements that Paul spoke to about taking more of an advisory approach to it. So I think my feedback on it, Chair, is because of the timing, it has since moved on. There's been a lot of development work by the team around all the control objectives that have been documented as part of the report. Some significant progress made in some areas, some not quite significant progress made in others due to capacity challenges, but more than happy to walk committee members through where that progress has been made. In terms of organisationally, there's a real willingness there, certainly at an executive level and a senior management level, in terms of the capabilities that need to be implemented across the organisation. I think the paradox there is just the organisational system that we operate within. You know, it's an org-wide challenge with the capacity constraints that we have, skills, knowledge, and experience challenges as well. I think one of the comments that I'd made to Paul during the course of the audit is, you know, we can implement a lot of capability, but it'll be the organisation's ability to execute that capability that will be the real challenge. And that's where I really feel that time is required to build on solid foundations. So what do I mean by that? I mean trying to staff our function, the portfolio function, appropriately, first and foremost, developing skills within that function that allows us to you know, execute and operate those capabilities that we put in place, building knowledge across the organisation. So one of the things I think that I put in my management response was to deliver strategic change well. It's not the sole responsibility of the portfolio function. It's an organisation responsibility. So that requires us to integrate and partner with other functions across the organisation. And then, of course, the experience element is something that will just evolve and mature over time. So that kind of solid foundation aspect is the Paul alluded to it, in terms of the time it takes to introduce some of these capabilities. So that's a little bit of an initial feedback for committee members quite happy to take questions and also go into some of the control objectives that have been noted as part of the report.
That's great, Andy. And just before I let you go, a helpful report for you or not?
No, absolutely helpful. As I mentioned, not necessarily surprising, but I think just given the timing of it, and Paul will attest to the rudimentary assessment that we gave him at the initiation of the audit. But I think Paul would probably say that the two do indeed align.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Andy. I'll just open it up to questions. Tim.
Thank you, Brian. Andy, that excellent response, and endorse everything you say, that this is an organisation-wide approach that we need to adopt here. And I don't want to go through the whole report, but I wanted to pick out something right at the start. In the very first control objective, there are two things that really jumped out at me. One was about defining what a change activity, what constitutes a change activity or a change exercise. And the other one, which was to do with whether all change activity across the organization should fall within the scope of the portfolio office, because my understanding is that the portfolio office is intended to help us coordinate a change across the organization. Now, both of those things, it seems to me, are quite strategic decisions, and I suppose my question is around the action point, which you are the action owner on this, and how, as a committee, we are going to be assured that those two strategic questions have been answered. I'm not entirely convinced that policies, processes and procedures within the portfolio office will give me clarity that those two big strategic issues have been resolved. So I suppose what I'm looking for is the mechanism by which we as a committee will be able to assure ourselves that those two big issues have been appropriately resolved, so that we can close them out as we order the progress through responding to the audit. Slightly wordy question, but I think you get the thrust of it.
Yeah, no, thanks, thanks, Tim. We're kind of thin on the ground, but John and/or Mark, as SLT representatives, is there anything you can offer by way of response to Tim?
I think it's a valid.
John.
Yeah, sorry. I think it's a valid point. I think to give all audit reports, and this report was also discussed and debated within SLT. So there is a commitment to moving this forward in terms of the portfolio office. I guess there was also a strategic decision in the past where we said we are committed to change and managing change better. Therefore, the Service Development Directorate was created to support that. So there has been a commitment to that measurement and management of the strategic change throughout the organisation. And my argument would be that SLT remain committed and supportive of that. I think obviously we're in that transition between Paul and David Lockhart, so we could probably give you more afterwards, if that's helpful. I don't know if Mark has anything further to say.
I think the only thing I would add to that, while echoing what you said, John, is that read the actions, the management actions, I think together, what I would say, Tim, and if you look at what was said under Objective 5 around the role of SLT effectively as a design authority, I think that's going to be probably the bit that brings all of that together for the first time. It's something that we've discussed for a couple of years, and I think when Andy came in, we wanted to give him his time to do that initial assessment. What do we need? And it was certainly one of the things that Andy also flagged very early on as well. So that, I think, is going to be the development that gives us that kind of strategic overview of change, what sits within the portfolio office, etc., and then the consistency of approach from the policies onwards across the whole organisation. I think Andy's right on that. This is not just what goes on inside the portfolio office. This is what goes on across the whole organisation. And I think SLT specifically taking on that role, I think will help drive some of that over the next year or two. Well, I hope it will.
Chair, can I come in with a response to Tim?
Yes, of course, Andy.
Thanks for the question, Tim, and I completely understand what you were asking. So I'll take them in order if that's okay. So we spoke about the definition of change and what that means to the organisation. I think what Mark has just articulated is spot on. We shouldn't look at these control objectives in isolation. They're all intrinsically linked. So you'll probably find me dipping in and out of each control objective as I provide a response. There is a draft recommendation for the definition of change that will be presented to the senior leadership team, but that will be taken in conjunction with a recommendation that's made around the portfolio governance, because it's important. We need to understand the governance that we overlay on top of the change. So we've got major change that we do in the organisation. We've got line of business change that we do within the organisation. We've got business as usual operations. We've got continuous improvement change that we want to do. So it's important that we get a proportionate definition of what change is going to mean to us. And then basically, how does that route within the organisation, Tim? Does it go into the major change portfolio? Is it managed within the functions? Is it managed as part of our annual operating plan, etc.? So completely understand your question, and it is something that is in draft for recommendation. Your next question was about the totality of change in the organisation, and this is always a challenge that's not unique to the service, because if you think about it, we've got a number of portfolios within the organisation. We've got the major change portfolio that we are familiar with as a committee. We also have ICT, who have their own portfolio. We have the assets and property portfolio. We have our operations portfolio. And so what we want to do as part of our recommendation is help the SLT consider how we might have and I'm getting a little bit technical now, so please indulge me, a bit of a portfolio of portfolios kind of construct or structure. So what the organisation-wide portfolio would do, i.e. myself and the team, would aggregate the totality of change where it's material enough up into that major change portfolio, but still allow the autonomy of the mechanics of the ICT portfolio and the assets portfolio to continue to operate as it does today, but for us to be able to bring that transparency and visibility to the executive level to make the appropriate decisions around. So, Tim, I hope that gives a little bit of insight to what we're thinking about from a recommendations perspective.
Andy, that's great. Thank you very much for that response. In fact, to all of you for the response. And I'm pleased to hear that SLT are obviously taking this very, very seriously. And I think, Andy, what you've kind of reinforced is that the points that the assets audit makes are important ones to resolve. I suppose my question is, I'm not trying to resolve them for you. It's how, as a committee member, I can be assured as we progress through closing out these things that they have been effectively addressed. I think that's really my major question, and I'm not expecting us to resolve it today, but I think I'll leave it hanging there, because that is my main issue with this. It's a good report. They're excellent points. How am I going to be assured as we progress through this that these points have been answered effectively? So, but thank you for your responses.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Now, Leslie, I know you've got your hand up, but Gary, did you want to come in on that specific point?
Well, yes, I mean, as a way of focusing minds and reports like this is almost a how do you eat an elephant report, because the scale of the challenge is high, and we're talking about program and project management. But in a year's time, if we were to come back to this area, what would success look like? So what would because this is medium and long term, and there are some things that and it's about prioritization to focus on the really important elements of portfolio management, which are going to have the biggest impact in achieving the outcomes you're hoping for. if there's a way of framing that, you would be able to come back to Tim in a year's time and say, well, we achieved that. We know we've got loads to do. It's going to take longer, but there are a whole range of projects which are being managed, and they're of different priorities and different timescales. And I think that would just bring a little bit of focus. Maybe it would help the committee and others just be really clear about what's deliverable within the current challenging circumstances and capabilities and capacity of the fire service. So just a way of thinking about it.
No, thanks, Gary. And indeed, the word elephant is one of the things I've scribbled on my page. So we're clearly in the same wavelength on this. Leslie.
Thanks for this fascinating report, and thanks for walking us through it, Paul. I've got a few points. I think that Andy's point about portfolio of portfolios, and Gary referred to programme and project management, I think is very important. And whilst this report is excellent, I am struck by the fact that we've got programmes going elsewhere, ICT being a key example. And I just wonder what this report would have looked like had it been looking at ICT or asset management. And I think that the processes and policies and so on, it's incredibly important that they are cascaded throughout the entire organisation. And I think that perhaps greater structuring of programme and project management within the whole organisation is very important. Sorry, I'm not been terribly clear here. I do, perhaps just to make it a wee bit clearer, I recall in a recent meeting, and I don't know if it was a board session or a service delivery committee, where we just paused and asked SLT if they were happy with the prioritisation. In this particular example, it was of ICT projects, and it just makes me think about the control objectives here applying to portfolio office, and just the importance of the same rigour applying to other areas where programmes are handled. So I just leave that sticking to the wall, I think. From in achieving effective change, obviously processes and policies are incredibly important, and there's a high focus on these in this report. But the other side of the coin, in my view, is training. So I'm just curious to know what training has taken place, because you need the two to achieve a change. Second point, and Andy, this is just, I would find it helpful background. I just don't know, but could you just talk me through how we link into, or how our approach reflects the Treasury 5 case approach, just that being the kind of best practice, as I understand it, for work in the public sector. And my last point is about the timelines. So it's good to see, I think, fairly ambitious deadlines for the management actions, and I look forward to those being achieved. But I note the request from the auditors to see if we can bring forward the December 22 ones, and just looking for a comment on whether that's possible, whether that's already been reflected in the timescales that we have. So a few points there, if you're able to come back. Thank you.
Can I come back,
Leslie?
Chair? Yeah, is that okay?
Yep.
I'll take them in running order, if that's okay, Leslie. So in terms of training, so just to provide some assurance to committee members, we actually, over the last 12 months, have been going through a programme of training, both for our senior responsible owners. So we've conducted senior responsible owner training, and that's for those individuals that we identify would take an executive lead position on our kind of major change projects and programmes. I think 21 individuals have went through that training, which again just demonstrates a commitment at the senior levels in the organisation to engage. In addition to that, those individuals who are in lead of some of our major projects and programmes, not all, but some have went through external training, such as MSP, Managing Successful programmes, and approximately about another kind of 18, 19 have went through that training, Leslie. The challenge that I foresee going forward, and it's not something I have a solution to at the moment, but it's definitely something that is on the radar, is that given the organisational churn through promotion processes and things like that, as people move out of these roles actually very, very quickly, and of course the pension remedy will exacerbate that also. So it's something for us as a function to keep an eye on, but that's training. In terms of the business case, the 5-case model from HM Treasury, what I would say is that we don't consistently align to that methodology at the moment, but our intention is to align to that methodology going forward. And actually, one example of that very recently has been some of the work that we've been doing on the PT-FAS programme, the People, Payroll, Training and Finance programme, where we have aligned to that programme. Now, as per some of the control objectives and some of the work that's going on around the process framework and the management practices, we will be looking to integrate the business case process into that business change life cycle, and we'll be looking to align proportionately to the 5-case model. I think is important to say, because it is quite robust. So hopefully that should give you some assurance around that, Leslie. And we are doing some early work with our finance business partners on what that looks like. In terms of the timelines for some of the management actions, I'll go back to an earlier point that I made in the introduction. I think we can accelerate some of the work that we're doing, but it goes back to the organisation's ability to then execute it once it's been implemented. And I think there's going to be some ebb and flow with that, because some of it's going to be new, some of it's not going to feel quite comfortable at times, and we just have to navigate our way through that. I think on some aspects of what we're working on in terms of being able to pull forward the December date, I would say very realistically not. And that's because of the capacity challenges that we have, more so within the portfolio function team. So if I think about the number of resources that we have in the function, I spoke about skills and knowledge and experience earlier. The formalisation of the portfolio function, whilst we had individuals within the team, they don't necessarily have the level of skills, knowledge and experience to go through and develop these capabilities and implement them in the organisation. So right now the productive capacity is me and one other. And so what we are trying to do is bring the rest of the team on that journey with us and develop them on the job as we go. And so that makes some of the timeline a challenge for us. And I think Paul alluded to that as part of the report about, there will be a requirement to further support some of the development work that we're doing from a resourcing perspective. But we just have to be in a position that we cut our cloth accordingly, And I go back to a point that you made earlier, Leslie. I took a note of it. What does good look like? Let's not try and gold plate everything. So let's go for iPhone 1, iPhone 2, iPhone 3, iPhone 4, and go through that iterative process. And that's very much the approach that we want to take.
Can I come back, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Andy. That's a very helpful response. In relation to your last point about the gold plating of the recommendations, I think a maxim I have always found helpful is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just go for good and get good. And if you can get perfect later on, fine, but let's just get the good in place. I very much welcome your approach to the proportionate use of the 5-case model. I think it's an absolutely cracking approach, but it has to be done proportionately. If it's not done proportionally, people will not do it. So again, it's get it in a good state and don't strive for perfection. There was one point I was going to raise, and it was oh, it's an age thing. It's just gone totally out of my mind. If I remember it, and if it's in any way of any value, I'll raise my hand again. But thank you very much for that response, Andy. Cheers.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Right, I am conscious of time, but I've got a few points that I just want to raise also on what I think is an incredibly important report, and the conversation that we've had, I think, really emphasises that. It's picked up quite a number of really important points. And going back to one of the comments that I made about the report making comments, observations, recommendations about organisational wide issues, that's been reflected in the discussion that we've just had, because there are issues to do with the scope of the portfolio office. Should assets and ICT be included there? It raises questions about the resourcing of the office. It raises issues about the prioritisation and, as a consequence, risk. It raises issues about the pace of change. And I don't see in the management responses all of these being properly responded to. And I suspect that's not helped by the fact that we're in this period of transition around the role of Director of Service Development. And I wonder whether we need to consider an enhanced management response to those aspects of the report that raises these organisational questions. And I would welcome that. I would welcome the new director and or SLT, obviously with Andy's input, to go away and reflect on these things, because if we don't address these bigger questions, we're not going to get to the root of the problem, because my sense here is that the organisation is doing something really, really important in the creation of a portfolio office, and I would want to commend the progress that has been made. But what I consistently hear are the limitations around pushing that as fastly as we need to do it, because although the report talks about a business case process being in place, the information I have from elsewhere is that that is not consistently being applied, and we are kind of exposed. And until we get these disciplines in place and working effectively, we're always going to be at risk. And that there has to be a sense of a need to prioritise. And I think the decision round about the prioritisation has to be taken at the top of the organisation. So what I'm going to ask for is that there is a sort of, it doesn't necessarily have to be a revised response in terms of what goes in this report, but to supplement the report, I'd like to see a response essentially from SLT to pick up these wider issues. Now, I'm not looking for a response to that just now, unless anyone absolutely disagrees with what I've suggested. But I don't expect a detailed response to that, other than just to see whether people are content that that's a reasonable suggestion. Yeah. And as representatives of SLT, John and Mark, are you content with that?
Yep, I'll pick that up. We'll have a chat to SLT on it, Brian, and we can certainly come back. And again, I think in the context now of the spending review and how we're going to be approaching that, I think it's probably the timing actually comes together very well for us. And again, some of those issues about prioritisation, resourcing, pace of change, we've already started that discussion, but I think having a proper response on that, on this issue, I think is something that SLT will be happy to do. I'm going to speak for Ross in this regard since he's not here, but yeah, I think we'll be happy to come back on that.
No, thanks for that, Mark. And as you say, the issue of change at a time of severe fiscal pressure is more important than ever. So we need to invest in the bits of the organisation that will deliver that change if we are going to sustain the organisation. It's good. It's good that we're on the same page there. So thanks very much. Paul, thanks. Oh, Leslie, you wanted to have you, is the age thing remedied itself, has it?
Oh, this particular age thing has remedied itself. Thanks. Sorry, Brian. It was just I know you've done a major point at the end of the discussion. I have just remembered what I was going to say earlier. Forgive me if I just feed it in quickly. It was from the point of view of workforce planning. Andy, you said that there was a particular challenge in with the churn, and I just wonder about the workforce planning so that you get a decent continuity of team available to you, so you can build up the expertise and experience and actually you've got them for a while, and that's about obviously efficiency and effectiveness of and use of our people resources. So I'd welcome comments on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Leslie. So you've read my mind. One of the first capabilities that I actually looked at coming into the organisation was around capacity management, which has led me to have conversations internally with Jason Sharp, who oversees workforce planning from an operational perspective, because one of the challenges for any project, and if you look historically at the way we're managing some of it at the moment, some of our major initiatives have had numerous project leads, which then starts to add a lot of risk and potential debt to those projects. And so what we want to be in a position of as a function is to see that coming. And the pension remedy has been a big challenge for us, right? To say, well, okay, all of a sudden we across a few projects, we've got people who will potentially retire. So how do we get ahead of that? Identify those individuals that will transition into that role, and from a portfolio function perspective, start to give them the support, the guidance that they need. But looking more sustainably into the future, how do we build that into some sort of a process for us? So be assured that these are early conversations that we've started to have, Leslie.
Okay, that's great. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Paul, for introducing that important and lengthy conversation. Thanks to everyone for the willingness and openness to contribute to it. I think it's been really, really helpful. So no doubt we'll come back to this and we can look at it again. We've got the next internal audit item is the progress report on recommendations. What we'll do is we'll take this and then we'll take a 5-minute break. So anyone who's having to cross the legs, you've only got a few minutes to hang on. So is that Jill or yourself, Gary?
I think that's me.
Right.
Okay, I'll just take you through the summary basically. As you can see, this quarter we feel that good progress has been made in implementing our recommendations, in that 11 actions have now been classed as closed. Also, a number of the actions are sort of approaching their final steps for them to be classed as fully implemented. So hopefully next quarter we'll have more closed as well. Unfortunately, 3 high-grade recommendations still remain, and some of this we appreciate is dependent on meeting with the Water Board, so which we understand they've cancelled a couple of meetings. So we appreciate that in order to implement them, you are dependent on the Water Board there. If I could just draw your attention to the front of the the dashboard. We have actually worked on this to update it to try and give you some more information. It now provides details of outstanding actions by risk priority level, as we thought that was important. And obviously you can see there the progress of audit year's actions, and I think it's interesting to note that you can see there has been sort of a downward trend, which is very positive. So I don't know if anyone's got any specific questions on any areas of the follow-up that they'd like to ask.
Thanks, Jill. And just to say that the addition, which is on page 4 of 17 or 102 of the pack, I think is excellent. It gives a really helpful at a glance view of things. So well done for that. Leslie.
Thanks, Jill. Just a quick question, and it's page 107, recommendation 5A. This is the risk appetite statement to be drafted for future submission to the board. I'm just wondering when that is going to be coming to us. So it's not a question for you, Jill, but perhaps for John.
Well, I mean, we've got a scheduled development day session next month, Leslie, where I think we're hoping to nudge the dial along a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Say no more than that. Okay. Any other questions? No.
I think one thing I would like to state is I think this quarter we've very much made a conscious effort to sort of try and close as many as we can, and like you said before, to actually look at what was the original recommendation. Are you addressing the risk? And obviously, you know, we've done that, and we've been quite sort of clear in, yes, you satisfied the original recommendation, we'll class it as closed. And like you say, if management decide to take any further action to sort of enhance controls, then that's different. But as I say, Karen and I from SFRS go through the recommendations every quarter, line by line now, and we are, as I say, making a conscious effort to. I know she's chasing people internally for responses, and obviously when we get those, as soon as we get those, she's referring them to me to see whether the actions that have been taken are sufficient to close the recommendations.
No, thanks for that, Jill. Now, Leslie, your hand's still up. Is that just because you've not taken it down? John, and then Tim.
Yeah, it's just to probably just re-emphasising what Jill's just said. Yeah, I hope what the committee are then now starting to see is that those actions are beginning to come down, and I think it is really quite useful from a graphical perspective, and it does reflect those conversations. So what we've talked about is almost coming through in the actions. So I wanted to highlight that. I also perhaps wanted to highlight around the water planning, because that's been one that has been. I hesitate to describe it as an exception to the process, but it feels something that is now outside of the norm, because it's one of the remaining elements of a very early audit, and it's something that, because of the discussions that have been going on with Scottish Water, we're now probably, and I've had a discussion with Stuart around this, we now feel that we perhaps need to escalate this further beyond Scottish Water and into government, because we've not been able to get to the adequate resolution of it. So just to highlight that to the committee, and also perhaps that we will then have to reflect again. What was the control, and how are we going to make sure that we're going to have an interim position in place, as well as actually taking forward the escalation process. So I wanted to highlight that it's not forgotten about, and we are now seeking to escalate further across government. So hopefully that's a helpful contribution.
It is indeed helpful, John. Tim.
Yeah, I won't prolong this much, Brian. John, glad to hear that you're going to escalate the Scottish Water thing. I have to say, I was going to ask if you'd started going down that route, so that's all to the good. But I can't help but comment on the page 115 of the pack and the disaster recovery plan. You know, I just, how many more times does this have to come back? really. It speaks directly to your point about people expanding what they want, what they do, and not addressing the specifics that was in the recommendation. So Pedant's point as well, it's not 100% complete, is it? So but I hope that one will be gone by the next time we review this.
Okay, thanks, Tim. David.
Thank you, Chair. David Johnson, Risk and Audit Manager. I think it's just some of the previous discussions and probably some of the evidence that's beginning to come through is about the number of actions that we now have compared to the number of actions we did have, and that kind of decreasing balance. And I think some of the discussions you had before was how do we provide you with that assurance that we have the kind of framework in place that is allowing these discussions to happen? Because I think some of the major changes are substantial kind of dialogue with assets. The follow-up group meets every 6 weeks. We're reporting now into the Good Governance Board, chaired by kind of Mark and John. We have that regular ongoing dialogue now, which is substantially different to what we had before. And I think it's that engagement that is actually starting to kind of bear fruit, and it's proportionate. I think that was a word somebody used earlier. There is a lot to do, but it's how we ensure this is seen as a priority. And I think that has definitely come through, Chair. And I think it's that work with Karen and Gillian, as well as the kind of managers that are responsible, that is really been one of the substantial changes. So it's just hopefully to give you the assurance it's not just coming to yourselves or coming to the Good Governance Board. It's all of that work behind the scenes that everybody's participating in. So, and again, it's taking the direction from yourself. So hopefully we're able to now demonstrate more coming through to yourself that's beneficial to the organisation and managing those gaps.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful context, David, and I think we definitely support all of that, because what we want to see is the operationalisation of all of this. We want to see and get assurance that work is actually being done to move these things forward. I guess the frustration that we all have is that there are certain of these that have been hanging about for far too long, and there are also concerns that some of them appear to grow arms and legs, and we need more discipline round about all of that. But we've discussed this, and certainly the trajectory is the one that we want to see. We want to see it being accelerated where it can be accelerated, but I think that probably will do us for this, and again hopeful that when we see this at the next meeting there will be progress, and certainly I hope there's something that can be said that is positive round about the water recommendations. Okay, right, well, apologies, we are running well over time, but we've had some substantive discussions that needed to happen. So can I suggest that we take a comfort break? Can we try and limit it to 5 minutes? So if you could come back just before 12, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, I think by my clock that's 5 minutes. So thanks very much for coming back promptly. We are over time, so if I could encourage everyone, including myself, and possibly in particular myself, to keep things brief as we go forward. Independent Audit Inspection Action Plan update, or standardisation of RDSTs and Cs and the challenges thereof. Mark, we see this every time. I don't know if there's much we can say about it. One of the questions I had, and Mary, you're probably best placed to answer this, is from the People Committee's perspective, are you all over this? Well, as far as you're able to be all over it.
Sorry, Brian, I was dealing with a postal delivery. Am I all over?
Oh, the difficulty with RDS terms and conditions.
Yeah, so I mean, in essence, it is the difficulty is the emphasis on the word there. I think that there's a bit of progress that's being made, and we're expecting an update. I think at the next ranks committee, there wasn't anything further to report at the previous one, but yeah, we are very, very conscious of the fact that it is something that we all want to see progressed, because it's a natural evolution in terms of the harmonisation of the terms and conditions within the organisation as a whole. So yeah, the committee is very, very much aware of it and cited on it, Brian, but there isn't much more of an update at this point that I can bring.
No, that's fine. And Mark, I'm assuming there's nothing more.
I think Kirsty wants to come in. She may be able to update you on something.
Kirsty. Yeah.
Hi. We were due to have a date with the FBU for negotiations last week, and unfortunately, because of the train strikes, excuse me, the negotiators, Joint Secretary negotiators, were not able to get up, and those days were cancelled. We have, however, got 2 further days for conciliation booked in at the end of July, where again, because these are through the NJC auspices, we've got 2 further days in place to continue there. So at that stage, we should be able to give hopefully a comprehensive update of where we've got to.
Excellent, Kirsty, thanks very much. Mark, and I wonder going forward whether we deal with this item just as an oral update rather than, you know, reproducing the paper. I think that would be
suggestion.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll take a note of that, Brian.
Okay, lovely. Thanks very much. That then takes us on to the external audit section. And John, we've got the audit dimensions best value action plan.
So I'll be brief, Brian, if I may, just because of time. So present the ARAC update on progress in terms of external audit actions. Just to remind people, those are broken down into the kind of wider scope audit actions, as well as the actions that were identified as part of Deloitte's normal previous year's external audit. Overall, there has been good progress made, particularly on the wider scope audit actions, and 3.1.12 summarises the kind of percentage complete. The summary of actions is represented at Appendix A. And there has also been some proposed date changes, so would highlight that to the committee. I think the other thing that I would want to highlight is that whilst we are progressing these actions, and management are providing the evidence, we need to get that subsequently validated by external audit, and that's either done as part of the interim work or more likely to be completed as part of the final year audit work. So we've been passing information through to Deloitte, but Deloitte don't necessarily have the resources necessarily to at that particular point to review and to conclude the position. So the action may be detailed as completed, but there's that final step in terms of validation to make sure that we want to close the action. So I don't want to misrepresent the position, but it's where we are in terms of progress. We have given all the evidence. We think we've closed the action down. We're waiting for that finalisation from the auditors themselves. And the only other thing that I wanted to highlight was there was one high priority outstanding action in relation to last year's audit with regard to PPE, and that is one that is now complete. And I wanted to highlight that to the committee. And that's it. And hopefully that's a fairly brief review of the progress around those external audit actions.
That's excellent, John, and thanks for highlighting those things. I think the paper does make it clear that from management perspective, these things are closed off, but they still need to be validated. But thank you for just making us doubly clear on that. Any comments or questions for John? No, John, it's an excellent update report. I mean, it's excellent that there's such good progress being made. There is complete transparency over where dates are shifting. and the presentation of all of that is first class. So thank you very much. And obviously, so I think what you're saying, at the very latest, we will get validation from Deloitte as part of their annual accounts work, but we might get something sooner, or?
Yeah, I just didn't want to misrepresent the position. So sometimes they've been able to give us a review already to say that's okay, but it still has to go through our final review process. So my view would be that we won't get a complete picture until the end of the external audit, effectively for this year, because that's when the resources will be applied. But there has been some interim work done, and they have looked at some of these things. So there is work being progressed by Deloitte on that. We just don't have a complete picture yet, Brian.
No, that's fine. And my working assumption is we wouldn't have it until the year-end stuff anyway. So that's excellent. Thanks very much for that. We look forward to subsequent progress reports. And then that takes us on to internal controls, strategic risk register. And David, you're going to give us the sort of high points.
Yes, Chair. This is the report made quarterly to the Audit Committee, and I think that the main take back is to try and provide that assurance that the discussion, the changes, the amendments, the prioritisation of risk and management is still being undertaken. The SLT reviewed the 9 strategic risks, and they're outlined. There are 4 changes in terms of the assessments made and some of the kind of dialogue that accompanies that. And then in section kind of 3.4, it's really just to try and provide that assurance, as I said, that there is a continual review. Myself and the team meet on a regular basis with heads of function to really have that dialogue, have that discussion, and making sure that discussion has been taken back within the directorates to kind of monitor risk and report that back. Some of the other work that people won't see is behind the scenes. I think a significant amount of work has been done with data services. It's not just the kind of risk register and output reports, it's how the framework comes together in trying to kind of align everything. And a significant piece of work's been done with the portfolio office to ensure that the reporting of risk and the awareness of risk from a kind of change perspective, portfolio perspective, is aligned to the overall framework. And one of the other changes, again, is about capacity and the kind of work plan within data services, is to try and simplify things going forward within a dashboard. Again, that is just, there's a lot of information that I'm aware that I'm attaching here. I think 34 pages, and it's really to see if we can maybe change the way that we show you that information without actually taking anything away. And I suppose that's the challenge, to make sure that you've still got the information behind the report that allows you to kind of ask and scrutinise any information. But I'll try and take any questions that you may have.
Okay, thanks, David. I have a response to that last point, but I'll come on to that in a moment or two. Any questions for David, or not? Just for David, for anyone. Leslie.
Thanks, David. In relation to your last question, I think I would need to look at it and review. I feel as though I'm just now getting my head round the different elements of this report. So if you're asking us how might we change it, I'm just thinking, oh no, I've just kind of got to grips with it. But if you want, I can see why you want us to look at that, but maybe you highlight that in the cover paper for the next meeting, and then we can give a bit of preparation and a bit of thought to it. Anyway, that's by the by. The specific questions, I've got page 171. This is strategic risk 6, and it's the cybersecurity, second cybersecurity one, SDD 007, procurement of application patching tool. I'm just wondering, this has been delayed due to capacity and competing work plan priorities. And I just wonder whether that is a big issue or whether it's actually okay that that's delayed.
Leslie, I would have to look at that and come back to you if I can with some more information. I'm not aware of the kind of background to that offhand.
Okay.
Apologies.
Okay, no worries. if that's okay with the chair, then I would welcome that, maybe coming back to committee rather than just myself. Page 182. Scrolling through. So this is a SDD 004 organisational culture, and there was something. This is an organisational culture of continual development and improvement, and the risk has increased here due to ongoing challenges in relation to the recruitment of posts. And I just wondered what that was about. There's been a big increase in the probability there. So I just wondered what posts those were and what was happening to address those issues.
Again, Chair, I would come back to the committee with an update, unless I don't know if Andy's still on the call.
No, I don't think
No.
it's.
Okay.
So was that, sorry, just so I'm clear, Leslie, was that SDD 04, did you say, sorry?
SDD 004, I think, on page 182. 182,
that's fine. I would come back to committee with those updates if that's okay, Leslie.
Okay.
I think, sorry, I wonder if Andy may have talked to some of that earlier on in terms of the kind of training requirements that they might have. But again, I would come back and maybe try and get some further information.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess I'm unclear whether it's a portfolio office or whether it's posts elsewhere. So just curious about that one. The next one, the last one.
John, did you want to jump in here?
Only to offer some thoughts on this. It's a more wider scale issue in terms of recruitment. We've got IT skill gaps, we've got gaps in terms of environmental officers, we've got gaps in terms of mechanics, there's a whole measure of vacancies and gaps within the organisation that are proving difficult in the current environment to recruit. And also therefore to retain some staff. So we've lost individuals as well, Leslie. So those are well known. We've also got the challenges you will understand around the pension remedy from the uniform perspective in particular, which then means that there's more pressure around recruitment through our HR processes, etc. So that's one of the reasons, and one of the reasons why the strategic risk around capacity and skills has actually been elevated to reflect some of those issues that were appearing through the risk register. So if nothing else, it gives you the context that at an SLT level, we've been reviewing some of this work, and that has been reflected in the overall strategic risk register. So hopefully that's a helpful contribution, Leslie.
That is helpful, and that also addresses my last point, which is the one immediately below on page 183, so SDD 008. So that's really helpful, but it does raise a question, and this is for Mary, really, and the People Committee. So is this something that the People Committee are looking at all, Mary?
Sorry, Leslie. I'm having some problems with my audio at the moment, so I can't find the button. In details, Leslie, can I follow up with you afterwards to give you some further assurance, unless there's something particular that Malcolm wants to pick up just now? But yes, in general is my general answer to that, if that helps at all. Sorry, I'm not at my best, Leslie. I've got COVID, so I'm not intellectually, cerebrally on the ball this morning. But generally, a yes assurance. But if I can pick up any specifics afterwards, I would appreciate that.
Well done you for still being on with COVID, and I really hope you get better soon. And I couldn't have told you had COVID at all. That was a perfect response, Mary. I do have it on my to-do list to attend meetings of the People Committee, and I will get there. I promise you. But in the meantime, get better soon, and no action at the moment. Thank you.
In fairness, Leslie, we are overdue a catch-up anyway to talk about a number of items, including, I suspect, this too. So yeah.
Well, give me a shout when you're feeling up to it then, okay? Cheers.
Thank you, my dear. Sorry.
From my side, nothing to add other than yes, it is considered by the People Committee. It is something that's on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. And Mary, not being on the ball, welcome to my world. So, other questions? No, I mean, I have a number of probably specific questions, but I think the questions from Leslie highlight one of the challenges in terms of us exercising our scrutiny role, because we ask questions, but we don't have the people in the room who can answer these questions. And you know, how do we deal with that? Because if we can identify questions in advance, you might be able to get people in advance to come along to that. But there needs to be a bit of spontaneity in that as well. So how do you do that? But so really that takes me back to your question, David. You know, how do we perhaps get better use out of this? And what I'd like to do is suggest that we have a workshop with ARAC and the chairs of the committees. We could do it with the board, but it might be better with a slightly smaller group. And what I think that would give us an opportunity is to run through the various kind of templates to understand how they hang together. Because, for example, on SR1, the very first one, where impact has gone from 4 to 5, I was trying to track that through the various levels of risk reporting, and I couldn't see it. I couldn't see it. But what I was encouraged is that at Appendix 1F, there was very clear evidence that someone was reviewing things because they were going up and down, etc. So that's great. But I think we need something where we can test the model, you know, from a committee perspective. And the reason for having the other committee chairs involved is, of course, it's not just the audit committee that are doing this. So it would give us an opportunity to run through that, understand more about how the executive deal with risks and manage it. And then it would give us an opportunity from a committee board perspective to say, well, that this would work or this doesn't work. So I feel we've been kind of on the brink of this for a while, and we really need to get on and do it, I suggest. So if there's no objections, I think we take that away and have a sort of session, a fairly free-flowing session, nothing that will require too much input. Malcolm.
Thanks. Yeah, no objections, absolutely. But I am also conscious of the number of lines of risk there, and wonder if we should be dealing with all of that at this level. A comment was made earlier, perhaps, about you know, some sort of executive summary, but and obviously there's the high-level strategic list at the top. So I just wonder if there's something that could be done that deals with different levels at different levels, if you see what I mean. Some of that happens, I know.
I think that's just an illustration of why we need to sit down and talk about it, you know, because if the format of reporting, which is very good and seems to work very well at the executive level, is not working for us, it's getting in the way of us exercising our scrutiny role. And I'm not suggesting that in any way is a deliberate sort of situation, but I think we've been expressing some misgivings about how we as a committee are able to use this, what is really valuable information. So I think setting some time aside, having that sort of open discussion, I think would be useful, and hopefully David will help address, you know, the question that you posed at the very beginning there.
Thank you. And I think the other, you know, exception reporting is obviously one aspect of that we may consider.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so so I think we'll draw a line on this report. Thanks again. And I really thought that the narrative in the paper and the Appendix 1F, which explains going up and down, was particularly helpful. So thanks very much for that. Next item, anti-fraud and whistleblowing. John, your standard verbal update.
I'm very conscious that we have got a private session where we're going to be talking about the investigation report, but I have nothing further to disclose to the committee at this stage, Brian.
Okay, John, thank you very much for that. National Fraud Initiative, David?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The 2020-21 is the kind of purpose of the report, and it's really just hopefully giving you that assurance that 99% of the matches that were forwarded to the service have been undertaken and completed with no identification of fraud. There are a number outstanding. I think the report highlights 14, that's now down to 12. A majority of them relate to outside organisations where we have traditionally, unfortunately, had trouble in getting information back from them. However, despite we will progress follow-ups on that on a regular basis, but the confidence is they will be taken forward into the next audit and will not be lost. There are 5 outstanding matches with HR. They are currently investigating them, and that information will come back to us. And if it's not back in time for the kind of final completion, again, my understanding is they will be taken forward. The report highlights that within payroll, there were 3 high priority matches. I think it's to give confidence to the committee that we treat everything in the same degree. So our look is to do all matches. We would start with the high and work down, but we will always look to do everything. So it's not that these 3 have been hidden somewhere. Everything is treated the same. And again, I would look to try and answer any questions you may have.
Okay, David, thank you very much. And pleasing to see the positive results. Any questions? Leslie?
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, David. The company house matches identified 22 potential conflicts of interest. I'm just where individuals work for the fire service at the same time as having an interest in a third-party organisation providing a service to the fire service. Can you help me understand why there was no risk? Was that because these individuals weren't in a decision-making position? Is that it? That seemed quite 22 seemed high, and it seemed. Yeah, can you help me understand why these cases posed no risk?
A potential example may be where we have a firefighter that is also the director of a vehicle company. That company is providing a service to Scottish Fire, and therefore there is the potential conflict. Where we're looking for that risk is the individual in the fire service signing off areas of activity that relate to their role in that third-party organisation, and we have not identified any. Where we identify that interest has not been documented, we would then be looking to the individual to forward that note of interest to the service. So I think what we're trying to show is that in some cases we don't believe there is a conflict, although the kind of wider report has the potential. And where we do identify that there may be something more substantial there, the gifts, hospitality and interest process will allow us to record that interest, but also get their manager's response to whether or not they have some level of responsibility to be authorising things they shouldn't. And we haven't identified those potentials. And again, one of the biggest things is using that as an opportunity to talk more about interests, to make sure that people are aware of that responsibility. So we do use that as a mechanism to hopefully increase awareness and ownership of this.
That's helpful. And my second point was about the organisations that are not providing us with information. And I just think give us a break. The public sector organisations in Scotland are required, are they, to participate in NFI? So it feels irritating that some are not cooperating with us, but I no doubt John has mechanisms to talk to his counterparts elsewhere, which are obviously proving fruitless, but I just wanted to express my irritation that that's the case.
I think Karen may be on the call today, who does a lot of the follow-up work, and I think her irritation would be represented there. I think it's colleges, there may be the prison service, it could be universities, and I think there's potential challenges over COVID and how we can contact people. But I think if I can provide you the assurance that we are doing our best to get that information from them.
Okay, thanks, Thanks, Leslie. David, we're back to that old chestnut again, conflicts of interests and declarations of interests. So NFI throws up 22 cases. How many had already registered that interest?
Chair, I don't know that figure. I can't find that figure out, and I will come back to you.
Could I take a guess and say none?
I know at least one or two that had the interest noted previously, but the vast majority, and then again, not all of them would be proper interest. So what I can look at is what the breakdown was and where there were actual interests within the organisation.
I mean, you know, the exact wording is 22 potential conflicts where individuals work in SFRS at the same time as having an interest in a third-party organisation providing services to SFRS. Now, by the definition of the requirement to record an interest, these should be being recorded. Whether it constitutes a conflict is then a matter that needs to be determined. But this is, again, exposing what I believe to be a fundamental and quite serious weakness in that we're not getting people to register interests. And that's disappointing. It's not a reflection on you, David, or anyone in your team. It's a concern that culturally in the organisation, it would appear that the message is not getting through. You know, so would you mind coming back to the committee to say of the 22, how many had previously registered that interest, and for the 22, can we can you provide assurance that if there is a potential conflict, that actions have been taken to manage that conflict?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. So I don't wish to appear sort of heavy-handed on this, but I do feel that we keep bumping up against this issue, and it's in a sense it's a bit like Scottish Water. You know, we're banging our head against the wall all the time and getting nowhere fast, but we maybe need to find another wall to bang up against to try and get this one solved, because what we're doing is not working, it would appear. Leslie.
It's on that point, I recall one or two, potentially 3 meetings ago, where David, you took us through a new policy that was going to be getting promoted across the organisation, that would result in people understanding that they needed to register these things. And I just wonder where we are with that. And I also wonder whether the next NFI exercise, if we would look to get substantially less than 22 potential conflicts of interest, and that would be a way perhaps of us knowing that the promotion of that policy had worked. Does that make sense? I can't recall which exact policy it was, but certainly the next results of the NFI should give the committee a way of finding out whether progress was being made. Is that right?
There's a couple of things, Leslie. I think the gifts, hospitality and interest policy was the one we came to you on, and the next report up, I can talk a wee bit more about the work that's been done on an LCMS package for that. In terms of that kind of assurance, we're using the NFI as that other means of augmenting the own processes, the governance processes we have, and I will come back, as I say, to the committee with that kind of fuller breakdown of where we knew or where we didn't know in terms of what was happening. That's all I can say just now, Leslie. I think I will come back with that information, but again, hopefully, and just very quickly, the gifts, hospitality and interest is something that the committee has talked about, and we're developing that kind of the policy. We've changed the template to try and ensure that when somebody does have an interest, that doesn't just go to them, that will also go to their line manager to ensure that he or she is aware of what that interest is and whether or not it does present a risk to the organisation. But again, the next stage is really to get that wider, to continue to get that wider level of communication out to the service, which we are starting to do better.
And am I right in thinking that if the number of matches to company house records reduces, then that would be an accurate reflection that actually we're making good progress?
It would be a reflection, yes, Leslie.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. And we then segue, I think, nicely, David, into the quarterly report on such matters.
Yes, Chair, thank you. The report covers the kind of 2021-22 year up to the end of that kind of quarter, which has 5 entries on the register, which we publish on the website. It also highlights that for the first quarter in 22-23, we've had no responses that we would publish, although behind the scenes we are engaging with people as to whether or not there are areas that should be published. And again, I think there was a single report that came under the kind of threshold that we will report to yourselves. But at present for 22-23, there are no returns to be made.
Okay, well, you know my views on that.
Yeah. Well, the only other thing I would say is that we have developed a presentation for gifts, hospitality and interests in terms of that widening the engagement and communication. So that at the moment is sitting with that's been developed. What we need to happen next is to put that into a format that the LCMS system can utilise and actually improve upon. We've done the same for the fraud, and we give them information and they actually put that into a very streamlined process. So we're looking to do the same for gifts and hospitalities. Unfortunately, I think priorities dictates when we can get some time within the team, and we're looking to get that within Q2. But it goes back to what yourself and Leslie are looking at about how do we engage better, how do we get that message out that people are coming to us rather than us finding things, whether through the UIG process for procurement is another method we're using to identify those potential interests. So how can we get better at it?
Yeah, but we shouldn't have to rely upon these secondary controls. You know, there is a self-policing element to this, which kind of should be operating. It operates in other organisations successfully well, but doesn't seem to be able to operate as well in this organisation. So, okay. Any other questions on this paper, Leslie?
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, David. My question is about the hot meals. And the question is, finance and procurement paid for a party night? Can you just talk me through that, John? It doesn't seem like you, John.
John, you can take that if you wish, sir.
Yes, and it was my colleague Ian Morris. So finance and procurement, personally, we were going for a Christmas evening out as a collective, and we booked the accommodation. Unfortunately, we were because of all things to do with the COVID restrictions, we weren't able to attend. We wanted to try and get some benefit back from the individual establishment and said, look, why can't you do something about this? It's a shame that we can't attend, but can you almost give food to people around? And we had then suggested even give it to the fire station because we just don't want food going to waste. So that was the context, because they said, oh, well, we've prepared the food, we've done everything, blah, 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 you're not attending, we're not getting a refund. And we said, okay, cook the food, just give it to the fire station.
Well, good luck to Kirkcadens. I hope you enjoyed it. But the key word you used there was personally. So,
yes.
right.
It was personally. So it was individuals. So we all contributed personally to this for a Christmas night, and that money is not. So it's not SFRS money. It was our own individual money. So just
that's absolutely fine. Can I suggest for the minute then that is clear, because I read that and I thought, I think that was personal, but then I thought it actually doesn't say that. It says finance and procurement paid. So just clarify that in the minute, please. And bad luck. I hope you get a good night out this year.
And I think if this is going to be published, the published version needs to be altered.
I'll get that done, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Right, okay, so this takes us on to HMFSI, and Graham, apologies for, you must have felt as if you've been hanging on forever to come to this, so so apologies for that, Graham. I hope you found it entertaining nonetheless.
Thank you, Chair.
So,
I'll keep this brief.
Thank you.
Graham Fraser, Fire Service Inspector. This is a report you'll have in front of you of our activity in the year 21-22. We completed 2 local area inspections, Argyll and Bute and Angus. We undertook a thematic inspection of the management of health and safety with an operational focus. There was an additional thematic on the preparations that the service was making for the COP26 climate change event. We've also been working on firefighting in tall buildings. That thematic is still ongoing, and we expect it to be laid in Parliament probably, I'll say early August. It might be July. It says in your paper July, but I think maybe early August. In relation to forthcoming work, you're aware that we've been developing a new replacement for the local area inspections, and we're going to focus on a service delivery area. So we've been working on the preparations for that, developing the actual inspection itself. We're getting data coming in from the service for the East. That's our first SDA that we want to do. Robert Scott and I have a meeting with the DACO on Friday, which is really a kick-off of the inspection fieldwork activity. Going forward, we have also a climate change thematic. Again, it's about the operational impact of climate change rather than the service's own mitigations for net emissions organisation. And that's essentially it. I can happily take any questions.
That's really good, Graham. Thank you very much for that. Do we have any questions or comments? Graham. Leslie.
Thanks, Graham. Just a quick one. In relation to the climate change one, I just wonder if there's a wee bit of space within your scope to have a look at how the fire service can contribute to best practice beyond Scotland in relation to tackling wildfires in particular. I think clearly it's a very important issue, and I just wonder whether we are, wonder if you can have a look at what we're able to do to support fire services elsewhere on that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Leslie. Graham, there was a slight exchange with Robert over the issue of whether there would be an annual report produced this year, and I understand there's not to be, and I understand the reason why there's not to be, and it would be interesting perhaps for you, me and Robert at some point to have a conversation about that, around some of the things that Robert has raised. So I wonder if you could maybe take that back and just float with Robert whether we can have a bit of a conversation about that. It's probably not appropriate for a public meeting, but it would be helpful just in private session, I think.
Yes, perfect. I'll take that back to Chair.
Okay, that's great. So thanks very much for that. And I hope genuinely that the context that you get from the breadth of discussion in this committee is helpful in terms of your understanding of what's going on in the organisation from an audit and risk committee perspective. So I hope that adds some value to you.
Absolutely, yes, we do get quite a lot of context out of the reports themselves from the auditors and others. Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. Then review of actions. Ali, are you going to try and make sense of it?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I will endeavour to do that. So Ali Cameron, Board Support Manager. So I've picked up a potential 7 actions, which again you can confirm whether or not the committee wish this to be actions. So starting with the first one relates to item 7, the committee annual report, revise wording and provide more detail relating to our publicly deemed meetings. The next action, if you agree, that's against the board support team. The next action is in relation to item 8, the draft annual governance statement. So regarding an omission, update all new board members in relation to the date joined and reconfirm board member attendance at committee to ensure complete accuracy. And again, against the board support team. Item 10 relates to internal audit. So AZET's in the next progress report to detail meetings being held and assurances given. That's against AZET's. And item 10.2, internal audit report against the portfolio office, just an enhanced management response to organisational wide questions that supplement the management responses. RAC request SLT to reflect and then bring this forward to the committee at a future date. And that's against the Deputy Chief Officer and the strategic leadership team. Item 13.1, overview of the strategic risk register and committee line directed at risks, just for the risk and audit manager to update the committee with more detail specifically regarding SDD 07 and SDD 004, and that's just the risks themselves and the mitigations. So to confirm that, whether you would like that by email, you can confirm the chair. And item 15, the quarterly updates of gifts, hospitality and interest registers, declarations of interests, update to committee in relation to the 22, detailed on how many previously registered and can be given assurances that action has been taken and there is no conflict. And again, if you would like that information circulated in an email to the committee, you can confirm, Chair. And the final one, just in relation to item 15, it's just an update to the register and detail around the wording for financial and contractual services regarding the cancelled event for the purposes of the record. And that's all those last 3 there were against David Johnson.
Right. Did you mention the workshop, Ali?
I've led a workshop to run through the SFRS strategic risk register template to see what could work best. So I've noted that we'll look to establish a date for a workshop.
Okay, that's fine. Certainly the 2 points, the updating on the 2 specific risks and the declaration of interests, happy for these to be circulated by email rather than wait till the next meeting. And that seems to capture everything that I can recall. John and then Malcolm.
Yeah, I think there was one. Sorry, Ali, if I've missed it, but I think there was one that we were to give you more information around debt and the kind of profiling of that. So that was one for Lynn.
Thank you, John.
Malcolm?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't know if it's needed as an action point, but I think there was one of the reports, I think it's report number 11 on the audit action plan that you said could just be a verbal report in future rather than bringing the full report. So I don't know if that's qualifies as action, but was worth noting.
Yeah, no, well remembered, Malcolm. That was the independent audit inspection update, item 11. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I've noted that just in relation to Audit Scotland, if you want that as a specific action, we can put that down as an action, or if you just want to take that as that's what will be included within the report going forward, it's entirely up to yourself.
Okay, I guess it will be recorded in the minutes, so so we're good there.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you very much for that. Then we've got the forward plan. which you have in front of you. Are there any comments, observations on your forward plan? Items to be taken forward into integrated governance forum or strategy sessions of the board. I mean, there was the kind of recurring theme about ICT capacity and capability, that there was the issue of just the difficulties with recruitment, etc. I think these are already, certainly the latter is on the radar, and I believe will be discussed at IGF this afternoon. Is there anything further than that that anyone would want to highlight? No. Okay, date of next meeting, 13th of October. And if there's no other business, I'll draw the meeting to a close. So thank you very much. It's run over by 15 minutes according to my timetable. Feels better than it was, but thank you very much for everything. And can I ask those who are needed for the private meeting, oh, well, you need to come out of this link and go back in, but if I could say farewell to those who are not in the private meeting, and thanks again for your input, and I'll see others in the private session, and if you can just take a couple of minutes for a comfort break, and then I'll see you in the private session. Thank you.